nuclear energy, that right we have, and it has to be recognized. All people that have the information, that have the knowledge of nuclear technology, they know to what grade enrichment of uranium is considered to be peaceful, and from that grade on it will be not considered peaceful anymore. And based on that, all countries, including US, must recognize the right of the Islamic Republic of Iran to have nuclear fuel to be used for nuclear energy, even if the 20% enriched nuclear uranium was to be considered. When we asked Mr. Aman, do we believe that 20% enriched uranium is peaceful or military grade, he said it was peaceful. So 20% enriched uranium is considered to be peaceful. But we must say that we didn't want to enrich uranium for 20%. From the start, we wanted to enrich it to 3.55%. That would cover all our needs. If there can be guarantees, sufficient guarantees to supply 20% uranium for the Tehran research reactor, our responsible officials are ready to negotiate to stop enrichment of for 20% uranium. However, that doesn't mean that we have no right to enrich the uranium to 20%. It is our right. However, it has that political situation. So if that's beneficial, you can enrich uranium to 20% yourself. But if you're limited in capacity and it's not profitable for you, then you can simply get it from some other place. If we can get that supply from somewhere else, that 20% uranium, then we can start negotiating on this matter.
Anything else you'd want to respond from earlier statements? But also the second part of the question from Mr. Sabam, I wonder if to what degree the tensions we're seeing, current tensions, are a result of sort of pre-election posturing in the USA.
Well, far be it from us to say that we would ever do that in an American election period. My view generally on that, if I can take 1 second, it's our friends abroad watching the American election. It's like when Odysseus went from Troy back to Ithaca and went by the island of the Syrens. Lash yourself to the mast until you get safety past. I think you'll find that whoever's president, we start charting a course that people are going to be able to live with. Just ignore our elections, please. Now, we do have a disagreement here. It's between me and George. I said that the United States was involved in the overthrow of Mossadegh, but you got to remember where we got the idea from. We got it from Britain. So it's just as long as we can go back and revisit the Revolutionary War. Now, I listened to our Iranian friend and colleague here, and it sounds to me like we might have the basis of a deal if indeed we can build confidence between the two sides. There are things, I'm sure, that have been done by my government or the Israeli government or somebody else that create suspicions in the minds of many Iranians. I think there's no question over the last several years there have been some things done by the Iranians that have been less than confidence-inspiring. We could talk about that all day and we would get nowhere. But I think the suggestion is, well, where do we go from now? And how do we start building confidence? First thing you do is you talk to one another. Mm-hmm. You sit down and you get the translation right, as you were just talking about earlier. You start with some things that might work. For example, I said, unfortunately, to show how I'm distorted by my 45 years working on Arab-Israeli, I said Straits of Tehran. I meant the Strait of Hormuz. Mm-hmm. Everybody has an interest in the free flow of commerce through that. Why don't you have an agreement on that? Why don't you have an incidents at sea agreement, like we worked out at the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, counter-piracy agreement, negotiations, discussions on the future of Afghanistan, where Iran wants stability, we want stability. Iran wants protection, just as Russia does, against the flow of narcotics from Afghanistan. It's the second worst situation anywhere is what Iran faced, the flow of narcotics. Let's start with these things and then get on to the contentious issues. But unless we start doing that, if we talk about 20% or 3.5%, 90% of the people of the world don't even know what the hell anybody's talking about. Let's start from the beginning and get a real dialogue going.
Ambassador, let me ask you one thing, though. In the same way that James Bond always needs an enemy, is America really ready to talk? I mean, if Iran is not the enemy that the US can sort of put up as the guys to be scared of, and this is, again, just putting it out there as an idea, who would be the enemy? Is it that the mindset can't change because America needs a bad guy?
When the Cold War came to an end, and I went as ambassador to NATO and had a chance to help with the translation into the future, which was begun by President George H.W. Bush. One thing about NATO, it's been wonderful, it's been bipartisan. People said, what's the enemy? I said, the enemy is very clear: instability and uncertainty, and the lack of opportunities for people to get on with running their own lives. That's what we don't need an enemy in the United States. We have an enemy right now. It's called 7.9% unemployment. It's called massive deficits. It's spending excessive amounts of the world of money trying to help provide security for other countries in the world. We'd be perfectly delighted, I believe, to find a circumstance in which we didn't have to worry about what Iran might do tomorrow, or what some other country might do tomorrow. We don't need any enemies. We got enough at home in our economy to deal with. Thank you very much.
I was going to say, some people think that that's the ideal way to prove that it's the politicians who are failing their people, and distracting them might be an answer. But sorry, let me get a response from Mr. Mehman Parast on this issue.
Some of my best friends are politicians.
I have only a suggestion. I think that for to solve this problem of translation, you know that so many Iranian people tried before to learn English and speak English too. I think that the main problem is the American authorities should try to learn Persian and speak Persian too. Maybe.
Thank you, sir. Now, what I'm going to do is actually bring in Mr. Kuyakov here and ask, looking at this issue, obviously here we have people at a political level talking, and they seem to be at a standoff. You have said that the grassroots people movement, in the case of the Atom Project, has brought about some change. And I wonder if you can see this idea translating across the world, and perhaps if the politicians can't find an answer, people can strike up some kind of grassroots movement to create change. Do you think there's a real chance of that?
I'd like to say a couple of words about this. Very often, Soviet Union was recalled. I think in those days, the countries had feasts, had their hands in feasts, and there was a danger that there was a rock in that feast. Perhaps there was a basis for that doubt. But I'd like to say that Kazakhstan was the first to open up that feast to show that there is no rock in it. We showed the world the open palm, and all other countries can deal with Kazakhstan. So first of all, I think people who live in those areas, regular Kazakh people, they were very happy to learn that the Simple Items testing, nuclear testing ground was closed. That gave them hope for the future. And perhaps that gives more power to survive through those problems that they had to deal with.
A couple more questions from our participants. Mr. Bachar was next, and then Mr. Mokram, I'll come to you. Again, I recognize some of the faces, but please tell us who you are and where you're from for the other participants.
Thank you. Arik Bacha of the Israel Press Council, which is an NGO. I'd like to confirm at least some of what Mr. Galway said, that indeed a majority of Israelis oppose the idea of getting into a conflict with Iran. not necessarily for the reasons you mentioned. I've been surprised myself to hear normally right-wing-minded Israelis oppose this idea, where I expect them to be on the other side. I think essentially the underlying reason for that is that there's an absence of real issues and animosity at the people-to-people level between Israelis and Iranians. And one thing I would like to ask our colleague from Tehran is whether the government there is aware of the impact, negative psychological impact on the Israeli public, listening day in and day out about the need to physically annihilate Israel. Now, I don't know of any other nation on the planet today which faces this kind of rhetoric. I mean, there are other quite failed states around the planet, and I certainly don't hear this kind of rhetoric. Is there no way of mitigating this, of trying to calm passions down? Thank you.
Mr. Mehman-Parast, I think it's directed towards you. Just a quick answer on the idea that perhaps Iran's posturing against Israel might be counterproductive.
موضوعی که ما فکر میکنیم باید بهش پرداخت مشکل
The problem of the Zionist regime and the crimes it committed in the Middle West is the worst violation created by the Zionist regime. It is also the worst obstacle in the Middle East in the matters of nuclear program. We believe it's a major mistake of the Western powers that they try to protect and defend the crimes committed by the Zionist regime and keeping silent. They close their eyes on the presence of nuclear weapons of the Zionist regime, and they don't want our region become nuclear free. And the only thing we can say with regards to the Zionist regime is that the very essence of that regime is in inciting wars, conflict, and occupation. Therefore, Iran is in no way, or rather, we give no significance to what that regime considers. We believe that the Zionist regime is now in a very difficult situation, especially after the Islamic awakening tide in the Middle East. That regime feels danger around it, and the statements it utters is there just to show that we're still here and we still have influence. However, no one pays attention to these kind of statements.
Thank you. Makram Khoury Makhul, Cambridge, UK. I've been following the coverage or the content of the Israeli press in Hebrew about the talks or perhaps the escalating campaign against Iran. And there is definitely, I can say, scientifically, academically, a media frenzy there, which people who don't understand Hebrew we will never get. Some of it, of course, is very radical, other is more rational. My question is, perhaps, I know that maybe you are not going to share with us everything, Mr. Ramin, but to what extent, or perhaps Ambassador Hunter knows a little bit about it, to what extent, please, does the capacity and or the nuclear ability of Israel play a role, whether it's negative or positive, in the direct negotiations between Iran and the United States?
Ambassador Hunter, perhaps you could try that one first, sir.
I have no awareness that the issue... Is this working?
Yeah.
I have no awareness that the issue itself has come up. In fact, I would doubt it. I just want to say one thing, listening to my Iranian friend. You know, I think that what he just said the average American politician, hearing a country that we deal with on a friendly basis called the Zionist regime, that doesn't help any. Let me say something. The government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I just said that. I didn't disappear in a puff of smoke. Why would somebody in Iran not be prepared just to say State of Israel? That might be a little beginning, and then we'll find another little beginning on our side and back and forth. Because the reality is that when the president of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, says, if there was a Holocaust, then we can do so. Why do you have to say if? And he talks about, let's go back to 1947, and then somebody says, this is the Iranians saying, wiping Israel off the map. Well, that's not exactly what they said. Let's get the rhetoric of anger, the rhetoric of negativism out of the way, and let's deal with the reality of the issues that are tough enough, because I don't want to give aid and comfort to those people in Iran and say we have nothing to worry about, but if indeed we have another war in the Middle East, everybody's going to suffer from it. Iran will suffer, Israel will suffer, we'll all suffer. We've got to find a way to get beyond this and to get on the track of finding a way out of this particular conundrum. The way our questioner here is obviously pointing us in the right direction.
Well, I'd like to bring in Dr. Sarkisian here and Mr. Sergei Dyachenko as well. And perhaps Dr. Sarkisian first. If there seems to be this impasse, certainly at the language level, if a country like Kazakhstan or the area of Eurasia in general can play a part, what role could it play in bridging that gap? Is there a feasible role?
Can I make a general observation?
Please.
Yeah. This is a wonderful panel. The panel had probably 2 or 3 themes. One is the peaceful nuclear energy, plus Kazakhstan. The second one was the banning of the nuclear weapons, plus Kazakhstan. And the third one was the Iran and nuclear weapons, the third one. And I was initially thinking about this panel. Inside me predicted that it will be completely captured by the third one, which happened. So while the first one and the second one had a very, very strong right for life, for several reasons at the end of the day, because I don't want at the end of this panel everybody going back again, saying, again, we heard something and the world is so dark and so unpredictable, and go back with the fear. And that fear will take also a fear from the nuclear energy. Well, I want to try to say that that's not the case. First of all, the way I look at the world, not in the perspective of between now and the next 2 or 3 years, I try to look at that in the next 30 or 50 years, or maybe the 100-year time. And the world that I see today is a wonderful world. It's wonderful because at the end of the day, after the 20th century, we enter 21st century. Based on the huge scientific research that was done in 20th century, we are on the verge of the new revolution, and that revolution is going to be the post-industrial. I was having a meeting with Mr. Shkolnik, and we're looking forward bringing to Kazakhstan a revolutionary technology which was created in the United States, and I will describe you to that technology. Don't worry, I'll be in 2 minutes.
Perhaps we could ask him also to...
Yeah, and the technology is and in MIT, a group of scientists has created technology when an existing bacteria in the world was modified genetically. In the normal life, it was capturing sun, energy of the sun, CO2, and producing sugar, then multiplying. But they did modify it, so it's capturing sun, it's capturing the CO2, very good job, and producing a full molecule, clean molecule of a biodiesel.
Of a?
Biodiesel.
Oh.
So to produce a diesel or an oil, you don't need to dig the land and take the valuable asset, which is the oil, and burn it. You can use it for proper... You don't need to cut down jungle in Brazil and Argentina and produce so-called biodiesel, which in fact is a production instead of air, oxygen, or food. So you will produce in places that have huge territories, sun, CO2, the biodiesel. And it's reality. The first factory is done in Texas. Why I'm saying that? Because in 100 years' time, we'll live in a different world, where the world will be managed by nanotechnology, new technology. But before reaching there, there is only one way. We cannot bypass not using nuclear power. And there is good in nuclear power. There is evil as well, like in everything, in bioresearch, in food, everything. It can be evil or good, but there is good in nuclear energy. And this country is doing a lot to prove that there is good in nuclear energy. And it's a country that also is open to have new ideas in. So I don't want people going back thinking that nuclear energy is a bad issue. There is no way we can get that wonderful future in 100 years' time if we will not use peaceful nuclear energy today. And one more comment. We have to remember that politics, in some cases, works like a pendulum. And politics has huge influence on energy sector. If you go back 7 years ago, the world was announcing the nuclear renaissance. Everybody was happy. United States wanted to build more nuclear power plants, even Britain to produce another 11, one and so on. What happened? Fukushima disaster, man-made disaster, not technological disaster. Now the pendulum is here. The right place of the pendulum is in the middle. So we have to use the nuclear power energy, peaceful means, and banning the weapons. And this country is doing a lot for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarkisian. And let me bring in Mr. Sergei Dyachenko here and ask about that question of Kazakhstan perhaps finding a greater role as a mediator, especially when it comes to issues such as Iran's nuclear hopes for power, for example, America's accusations of nuclear military aspirations. Where can Kazakhstan fit in?
You know, I'd like to continue your point that the 21st century is unthinkable without the nuclear energy, and Mr. Skolnik might continue my idea because he's a nuclear physicist and nuclear industry person. But following this discussion, I get more and more convinced about the wisdom of our president when he denounced nuclear weapons. That was a very difficult decision, and you probably know, basically there was some resistance from the former Soviet administration, but it was a very brave